In 1998, an entire traveling circus packed up their tents after a show in rural Arizona and simply never arrived at their next destination. No crash, no wreckage, no bodies, just silence. Welcome to Criminal Mind Tales, where every mystery has a darker side and every crime hides a story waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe now and step deeper into the shadows with us. That summer night in Cienega Springs was supposed to be like any other. Families piled into pickup trucks and lined the dusty field where the Vargas Traveling Circus had set up its striped big top. For hours, the desert sky shimmered with spotlights, laughter, and the smell of fried dough. Children clutched sticky cotton candy. Mothers fanned themselves in the heat, and fathers leaned against rusting fences, watching lions roar and acrobats leap. It was a kind of magic small towns live for, the fleeting glamour of the circus rolling through. The posters had promised marvels, and for one night, they delivered. A trapeze artist in crimson soared through the air, catching gas with every daring swing. A clown known as Little Hugo painted smiles wider than his own, juggling fire and spinning on a unicycle. And at the center of it all was Anton Varga, the booming ringmaster with a chest like a drum, his voice filling the tent with promises of wonders yet to come. But beneath the color, there were shadows. A truck driver swore he saw Anton in a heated argument backstage with two men who didn't belong, plain clothes, heavy boots, eyes sharp as knives. A teenage girl noticed the trapeze star crying by her caravan before the show, clutching her infant close. A mother at the concession stand claimed she overheard someone mutter, "This is the last time. After tonight, it's over." The performance ended past midnight. The crowd drifted away. The trucks lined up like a convoy, engines rumbling under the stars, headlights cutting long beams across the dirt. The caravan rolled east, bound for New Mexico. That was the last time anyone ever saw them. By dawn, the field was barren. No tents, no trailers, no animals, no performers. Only scraps of paper blowing in the wind and faint impressions in the dirt where the trucks had been. Families in New Mexico waited in vain for the circus to arrive. Phone calls went unanswered. Within days, panic set in. At first, whispers spread that Anton had finally given in to his debts and fled with his troop, abandoning the country under cover of night. Others believed bandits ambushed him along the highway, or that the circus had been caught in something darker: smuggling, animal trafficking, debts owed to dangerous men. Yet there was no wreckage, no bodies, no ransom. Search teams combed the highways, desert brush, and canyons for weeks. They found nothing. For the families left behind, the silence was unbearable. Wives placed missing persons reports. Parents clung to photographs of their children who had performed beneath the big top. One sister recalled waiting by the phone every night, convinced she'd hear Maria Elena's voice again, telling her she'd made it home. Instead, she heard nothing but the dial tone. The FBI joined the investigation quietly. With no crime scene, no remains, and no evidence beyond absence, their hands were tied. Officials described it later as one of the strangest vanishing acts in modern history. The circus simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but rumors. Some swore they spotted Hugo in a border town tavern. Others claimed the animals had been sold off in Texas. But every lead dissolved into nothing until the case itself grew cold. 6 years later, hundreds of miles away, a discovery beneath the desert floor would raise more questions than it answered. A smuggling tunnel, rusted cages, decayed ticket stubs, a battered trunk with red paint peeling from its lid, the word still visible through the dust. Vargas marvels. The circus had not vanished into thin air. It had gone underground. The highway east out of Cienega Springs is long, flat, and merciless. For miles it cuts across the desert like a ribbon of faded asphalt, vanishing into horizons of dust and rock. It is a road where the sun seems to bake everything into silence, where even the sound of engines carries for miles before evaporating into the dry air. In 1998, that was a route the Vargas Circus was meant to take, trucks rumbling eastward toward New Mexico. By all accounts, they left town after midnight. Locals remember the glare of their headlights snaking into the dark, a procession of vans, animal trailers, and battered trucks carrying performers and their lives packed into trunks. It was an image burned into memory, a caravan of noise and light swallowed by the night. They should have arrived in Gallup, New Mexico, before sunrise. But they didn't. And the road in between, a road with gas stations, diners, and truck stops, yielded no answers. That is where the investigation began. Authorities retraced the path mile by mile. They asked attendants at dusty filling stations if they'd seen a circus convoy that night. Most said no. One man, who ran a gas station near Holbrook, claimed a woman in sequins came in around 1 a.m., carrying a child. She asked for water. When pressed for more detail later, he hesitated. Maybe it was her, he said, or maybe I'm remembering wrong. Another trucker, parked near the border crossing, swore he saw flatbed trailers carrying cages roll past him in the dark. But when investigators followed up, they found nothing. There were no receipts, no security footage, no credit card records tying the circus to any stop along the way. It was as if the convoy had dissolved between Cienega Springs and Gallup. The desert does not give up secrets easily. Search teams spread out across miles of barren terrain, scanning ravines, arroyos, and dried riverbeds. Helicopters swept overhead, eyes on the earth for signs of overturned trucks or scattered wreckage. But no twisted metal gleamed in the sun, no tire tracks led off the road, no vultures circled the sky. This led to the first chilling question. If there had been an accident, where was the wreckage? And if there had been an ambush, where was the violence? Sheriff Raymond Ortega, the first to oversee the search, admitted years later that something about the disappearance never sat right with him. You don't just lose an entire circus, he said. You don't misplace elephants and lions. You don't misplace 30 people with trucks and caravans. Something happened out there, and someone knew how to make it disappear. But the question was, who? Rumors multiplied in the absence of evidence. Some said Anton Varga had been drowning in debt, owing money to men who wanted repayment in more than cash. Others whispered that the circus was a cover for smuggling, exotic animals, contraband, maybe even people. One story suggested that the convoy had driven straight across the border under forged documents, vanishing into Mexico to start anew. None of it could be proven. Still, there were unsettling details. Weeks before the disappearance, a local mechanic who serviced the circus trucks claimed he noticed unusual modifications. False panels welded beneath the trailer, compartments that seemed designed to hold more than props or costumes. He thought little of it at the time. After all, circuses carried all kinds of strange equipment. But when news broke that the Vargas had vanished, he began to wonder if those compartments had carried something else entirely. The performers themselves became part of the legend. Maria Elena, the trapeze artist, was remembered for her grace, but also for the strain she carried in private. Friends told investigators she had been saving money, talking about leaving the circus to settle down for her child's sake. But she never had the chance. Hugo, the clown, was rumored to have gambling debts in Las Vegas. Some believed his troubles followed him onto that midnight road. Anton Varga was seen by some as a visionary, by others as a tyrant. To his fans, he was the booming voice of magic. To his performers, he was a man who ruled with both pride and paranoia. If anyone had secrets worth burying, many thought it was Anton. But secrets, like people, do not vanish without a trace. Families demanded answers. Wives filed missing persons reports. Parents pleaded for news of children they had sent on the road with the circus. Yet with no bodies and no evidence of foul play, law enforcement struggled to classify the case. Was it a mass disappearance, a voluntary flight, or something darker that couldn't yet be named? The press swarmed the story. Headlines screamed circus vanishes into thin air and vanishing act turns deadly. Tabloids fueled wild theories, alien abductions, satanic rituals, even government cover-ups. For some, it was entertainment. For the families, it was torment. Every few months, a supposed sighting surfaced. A waitress in El Paso claimed she served a man with a booming voice and a European accent. A rancher near the border said he heard the roar of lions late at night, carried on the desert wind. Each report sent investigators chasing shadows, but nothing concrete was ever found. The road remained empty. As years passed, the highway became a symbol. Locals called it the Vanishing Road. Travelers swore they felt uneasy driving it after dark, headlights stretching across asphalt that seemed endless and cursed. For some, the disappearance became a ghost story. For others, it was an open wound that refused to heal. But the truth would not stay buried forever. In 2004, 6 years after the circus vanished, Border Patrol agents discovered a crude tunnel beneath an abandoned warehouse near Nogales. It stretched for hundreds of feet underground, the air thick with dust and the stench of decay. Inside were cages, empty but rusted, costumes crumpled into trunks, ticket stubs discolored by moisture, and on one battered chest, half buried in dirt, the painted name still visible through the grime, Vargas Marvels. The circus had not simply vanished on the road. Somewhere along that midnight highway, it had been diverted, swallowed into the world of organized crime, its traces hidden underground. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. Had Anton Varga led his circus willingly into that tunnel, or had the entire troupe been forced there against their will? The road had given no answers. The tunnel, at last, whispered its secrets, and what investigators found next would darken the story even further. For most people, the circus was entertainment, a fleeting night of wonder before life returned to its usual rhythm. But for the families of performers, the disappearance was not a mystery to gossip about. It was a wound that never closed. The Vargas Circus may have vanished from the desert highways in 1998, but the people within it were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, parents and children. When the lights of the big top went dark, those left behind were plunged into years of silence. The first calls came in the morning after the convoy failed to arrive in Gallup. Mothers dialed numbers that rang endlessly. Husbands checked payphones in towns along the route, waiting for calls that never came. By the third day, panic spread. Maria Elena's sister Sophia remembered pacing her kitchen, the baby's crib still set up for visits that never happened. She promised she'd come home after New Mexico. She said she was done with the road. She was tired. She wanted to give her daughter a normal life. That was the last thing she ever told me. For Hugo's older brother, a mechanic in Nevada, the silence was unbearable. My brother was a fool sometimes, sure, but he always called. If he lost money, if he got drunk, he'd still pick up the phone and admit it. He wouldn't just vanish. Not him. Not like this. And then there were Anton Varga's children, scattered across cities, none of them part of the circus anymore, each estranged from their father in different ways. They heard the news not through family calls, but through headlines. For them, the mystery cut with both grief and suspicion. One of Anton's sons, speaking years later, put it bluntly, if anyone could make 30 people vanish, it was him. My father lived in secrets. As the weeks dragged into months, homes grew heavy with the weight of absence. Plates went untouched at dinner tables. Birthdays passed with empty chairs. Parents left porch lights burning, hoping somehow the circus would find its way back. But grief has a way of splitting families. Some clung to hope, refusing to accept death without proof. Others grew hardened, convinced their loved ones were gone forever. In Phoenix, the family of animal trainer Carlos Medina posted flyers across the city, photographs of him with his lions, smiling, his arm around fellow performers. Missing, the posters read. Last seen, Cienega Springs, AZ. For months, they drove highways, checked bus stations, followed rumors of sightings across state lines. Every lead ended in disappointment. In Santa Fe, the mother of a young juggler stopped attending church. She couldn't stand the whispers. People saying maybe her son had run away, maybe the circus left on its own. They talked like it was a choice, she said through tears. But I know my boy. He would never walk away without saying goodbye. The press circled like vultures. Tabloids ran wild with speculation. Circus joins cult and disappears. Traveling show smuggled across the border. Carnival of death in the desert. For grieving families, every headline was a dagger. Yet the coverage kept the case alive. News cameras captured candlelight vigils, rows of photographs lined against fences, children holding balloons for missing parents. In Gallup, a makeshift memorial grew at the fairground where the Vargas were meant to perform. Families left roses, circus posters, stuffed animals. The local newspaper called it a carnival that never came. But silence has a way of breeding obsession. Relatives began to chase their own investigations. They collected maps, interviewed strangers, pressed police for files. Sophia, Maria Elena's sister, kept a journal of every rumor, every lead. Her notes filled 3 notebooks: times, dates, names, sightings. One entry read, "Man in Juarez swears he saw a trapeze girl with child in tow." Followed up, nothing. Another. Truck driver recalls convoy, then retracted. Why? Hugo's brother traveled to Las Vegas chasing whispers of debt collectors. They said he owed, he told investigators. But owing money doesn't explain 30 people disappearing. That's more than debt. That's something else. Even Anton's estranged children began piecing together fragments of their father's life. Old letters, ledgers, business contacts. They unearthed hints of deals that stretched beyond circus tents. Transactions involving unmarked cash. Strange imports, connections to men whose names carried weight in border towns. But for all their efforts, the truth never surfaced. The official investigation withered. Without evidence of crime, without a body, the case was suspended, then quietly shelved. People disappear every day. One official was quoted as saying, "Families vanish, groups run off. This is unusual, but not impossible." To the families, those words were betrayal. "We begged them," Sophia said. "We begged them to keep looking." But it was like the desert swallowed everything, and they were ready to let it stay buried. Time passed, but hope never fully died. Each anniversary brought vigils, gatherings, reminders that the story wasn't finished. Parents grew older with no answers. Children grew into teenagers haunted by the absence of mothers and fathers who had left for work and never returned. And then, 6 years later, came the call that reopened every wound. Border Patrol agents near Nogales stumbled on a tunnel burrowed beneath an abandoned warehouse. Inside, investigators found rusted cages, damp walls, and trunks filled with decayed costumes. One of the trunks was painted with red letters that refused to fade. Vargas Marvels. For the families, it was both relief and horror. Proof that the circus had not simply run away. Proof that something darker had happened. But where were the bodies? Where were the people? The tunnel answered one question. The circus had not vanished into thin air. It raised others that cut even deeper. Had the Vargas troupe been captives in those tunnels? Were they forced into the underworld of smuggling, their skills and lives reduced to commodities? Or had Anton himself led them willingly into that darkness? The families who had kept their lights burning now faced a different kind of torment. Their loved ones had not left by choice. They had been taken somewhere they could not escape. And yet, even with the tunnel exposed, the people were still missing. The silence had returned, heavier than before. Before we continue deeper into this mystery, don't forget to subscribe to Criminal Mind Tales. Every week, we uncover stories where the truth is stranger, darker, and more unsettling. Hit subscribe now, and join us as we step further into the shadows of this case. It was July of 2004 when a desert storm swept over the southern border near Nogales, tearing tin roofs from abandoned sheds and peeling back the dust of forgotten places. The storm revealed more than wreckage. It exposed a scar in the earth. A collapsed section of ground behind a crumbling warehouse had given way, opening a mouth into something buried deep below. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an old drainage shaft, one of countless tunnels carved by time and erosion. But when Border Patrol agents lowered a flashlight into the gap, the beam struck something unnatural. Metal bars, welded into the shape of a cage. That discovery would drag the Vargas disappearance back into the spotlight. 6 years of silence cracked open in a single night. Inside the warehouse, the air was suffocating. Thick with rot, damp with the scent of mold and rust. Investigators pushed deeper, guided by flashlights that cast long, shaking shadows across the walls. What they found did not belong to the desert above. The floor sloped downward into a hidden corridor carved by human hands. Reinforced beams lined the passage, and the further they went, the more the space shifted from ruin to design. The corridor opened into a chamber, low-ceilinged, windowless, with walls dripping condensation. In the center sat a row of cages. Some were toppled. Others still stood upright, their locks corroded but intact. Straw lay scattered across the concrete floor, brittle and discolored, as though it had once been used as bedding. And then there were the trunks, wooden, waterlogged, and sealed with rusted clasps. When pried open, the contents seemed almost theatrical. Sequined costumes stiff with decay, tarnished juggling pins, a child's unicycle, a trapeze net knotted and torn. On one trunk, painted letters bled through the rot. Vargas Marvels. Photographs taken that night would never be released in full, but those who saw them spoke of something chilling. The way costumes were folded neatly, as though someone had intended to return for them. The way the cages were not large enough for animals, but perfectly sized for people. To law enforcement, the tunnel was both a revelation and a riddle. It suggested captivity, trafficking, exploitation. But there were no bodies, no bones, no definitive proof of what had happened in those chambers. The families, though, saw enough. For them, the message was clear. Their loved ones had been here. They had been kept here. Speculation ignited. Some believed Anton Varga himself had orchestrated the descent, leading his troop into a hidden life far from the eyes of small-town America. Others argued the circus had been taken, captured and sold into the underground economies that thrive along the border, where people could vanish without a trace. The layout of the tunnel fueled darker theories. Its design was meticulous, reinforced with lumber hauled in deliberately, its chambers interconnected like a hive. It wasn't the work of a desperate man. It was infrastructure. And there was the matter of the cages. Too many, too specific. Not for animals. For people. Local whispers grew louder. Residents spoke of trucks seen near the warehouse in the late 90s, of strange sounds at night. Laughter, cries, music drifting faintly from beneath the earth. One man, a rancher, came forward years later with a memory that haunted him. He had passed the warehouse one night and seen a glow through the slats of broken boards, as if lanterns burned within. He swore he heard voices in a language he couldn't place, the faint rhythm of drums echoing. At the time, he dismissed it as teenagers or squatters. After the discovery, he wasn't so sure. The investigation was reignited, but answers remained elusive. Forensics teams tested everything. Fibers, soil samples, the wood of the cages. The results gave little more than confirmation of what was already known. People had been there, and they had been gone for years. The only human trace came in the form of a single fingernail lodged between the bars of a cage. DNA testing was inconclusive, degraded beyond identification. Still, for the families, the tunnel transformed absence into horror. Their loved ones hadn't walked away. They had been dragged underground, into a place where laughter turned into screams, where freedom was reduced to a locked cage. But even as the discovery brought some measure of truth, it carried a more sinister implication. If the Vargas troop had been here, where had they gone? Who had moved them? And why leave behind the costumes and trunks, but not the people? Theories multiplied. Some said the circus was trafficked into Mexico, parceled out like property. Others whispered of secret performances staged for those who paid enough. An underground circus of captives forced to perform until they died. The most chilling theory was the simplest, that the tunnel had been a temporary holding place, that the convoy was seized, brought underground, stripped of their identities, and then moved elsewhere, deeper into the networks of those who trade in human lives. For 6 years, the families had lived in silence. Now, they lived in torment. The discovery confirmed the unthinkable but denied closure. They knew the Vargas Circus had not vanished into thin air. They had been taken into the dark. Still, the earth kept its secrets. Beyond the cages, deeper within the tunnel, investigators uncovered one final chamber. Inside, scrawled across the wall in flaking red paint, were words that sent a shiver through everyone who entered. The show must go on. No signatures, no explanation, just those words. That chamber was sealed off, the evidence locked away, but its existence spread quietly among those who had seen it, becoming a legend in itself. For the families, it was a cruel reminder. Somewhere, someone was laughing at their pain. The warehouse was eventually demolished, the ground filled, the tunnels collapsed. Officially, it was for safety. Unofficially, some suspected it was to bury the shame of what had been found there, a scar on the land too dark to leave exposed. But for the families of the Vargas troop, the demolition was one more theft. They filled it with dirt, Sophia said bitterly, like they wanted us to forget. But we won't. We can't. 6 years after the convoy disappeared, the tunnel beneath Nogales had given the first glimpse of the truth. But it wasn't an answer. It was a doorway into something far larger, far darker than anyone had imagined. And if the Vargas troop had been swallowed whole by this hidden world, then one question haunted everyone who still remembered them. Where had they gone next? The tunnel should have been the end of the Vargas mystery. 6 years of silence broken by cages and costumes buried under the desert. There was nowhere else for the story to go. But just as investigators began to close the file once more, whispers surfaced. Not rumors, not folklore. Whispers tied to names, places, and faces that looked too familiar to ignore. It started in border towns, where the line between rumor and reality is as thin as the chain-link fence that separates two worlds. A cantina owner in Hermosillo swore that in the summer 2002, 2 years before the tunnel discovery, a woman had come in wearing heavy stage makeup, her voice trembling as she asked for water. He remembered her because of the way she sang quietly to a baby strapped to her chest. Later, when photos of the Vargas troop resurfaced, he pointed to a picture of Elena Vargas, the trapeze artist and Anton's niece. Then came a report from El Paso. A mechanic claimed a man in a tattered clown costume wandered into his shop, asking for spare food. The man called himself Hugo. He had no shoes, no identification, but he laughed nervously while juggling 3 wrenches, as if muscle memory alone kept the act alive. By the time the mechanic returned with bread, the man had vanished into the streets. At first, law enforcement dismissed these sightings as mistakes, illusions fueled by the legend of the missing circus. But the whispers grew louder. In 2005, a church group on a mission trip outside Chihuahua described stumbling upon a roadside gathering, part market, part performance. Among the fire breathers and knife swallowers, they swore they saw a boy in a sequined vest tumbling and cartwheeling, his eyes hollow, his movements mechanical. The boy, they said, looked exactly like Mateo, the youngest acrobat of the Vargas troupe, who would have been about 12 at the time. The group tried to approach him, but a man with a whip at his belt stepped between them. When they returned the next day, the makeshift market was gone. The accounts didn't stop there. A drifter in New Mexico told police about a circus that never advertises, a traveling show that performed only at night, behind closed doors, for select audiences. Tickets weren't sold, they were bought. The drifter swore he'd seen cages loaded onto trucks, the sound of crying inside. He mentioned the name Varga as if it were a brand or a curse. The stories were scattered, inconsistent, impossible to prove, but they all carried the same eerie pattern. The circus had not died. It had gone underground. For the families, each whisper was a lifeline, a cruel one, but a lifeline nonetheless. Sophia kept a map on her wall, pinning every alleged sighting with red tacks. "They're breadcrumbs," she said in an interview. "They're out there. Someone has them. And we just have to follow the trail." But the more she chased the trail, the stranger it became. A man in Nogales mailed her an anonymous letter claiming he'd seen Elena in a smuggler circus that catered cartels. "They make them perform for the bosses." The letter read, "If they refuse, they disappear forever." Another family received a phone call. In the dead of night, a woman's voice whispered, "I'm alive," before the line cut. Caller ID traced a number to a prepaid phone purchased in Mexico City. The FBI investigated both leads. Officially, nothing came of them. Unofficially, some agents admitted off-record that the sightings disturbed them too much to dismiss entirely. Not all whispers were a survival. A trucker traveling along Highway 191 told a chilling tale of a convoy he passed late one night. Flatbed trucks carrying cages, tarps pulled loosely over their tops. From beneath the tarps came faint sounds, clanking metal, coughing, someone humming. When he slowed at a checkpoint, the convoy turned off down a dirt road, vanishing into the desert. Another account came from a migrant who claimed he'd been held in a smuggling compound outside Juarez. Among the dozens of captives, he swore he saw men and women in circus costumes, practicing routines under duress. He remembered a whip cracking and a voice shouting, "The show must go on." When pressed for more details, he shook his head. They weren't prisoners, he said. They were property. For investigators, the whispers created a dangerous tension. If the Vargas troupe had survived, even partially, then someone was keeping them hidden and profiting from them. Following those whispers meant stepping into a labyrinth where human trafficking, cartel power, and organized crime converged. The problem was evidence. Every lead evaporated. Every name given turned out false. And every supposed witness who spoke too loudly seemed to regret it. One cantina owner who swore he'd seen Elena close his business overnight and disappeared. The mechanic who saw Hugo was found beaten unconscious in an alley, refusing to speak again. Coincidence, perhaps, or something darker, an invisible hand, ensuring the whispers stayed whispers. The families, however, refused silence. They began organizing vigils not just for the lost, but for the possibly alive. At these gatherings, they carried photographs of the troupe, chanting names into night, as if the echoes themselves might reach those hidden in the dark. Yet for all their determination, hope carried a brutal edge. "Every time I hear a new sighting," Sophia confessed, "I wonder, is it really them? Or am I just holding on to ghosts?" The mystery of the survivors took on its own legend. Some claimed the troupe had become a kind of traveling phantom, seen only by those who stumbled too close to the truth. Others whispered that the performers themselves were forbidden to reveal their identities, that their survival depended on silence. And then, in 2006, one final whisper surfaced. This one not from strangers or drifters, but from a man who swore he had been there. He claimed he had worked security for a compound outside Sinaloa, that he had watched performances held in candlelit courtyards, where masked men forced a ragtag troupe to act, juggle, and swing from makeshift trapezes. He remembered the ringmaster most vividly, a man with a booming voice who always began the shows with the same words: "Welcome to Vargas Marvels." If his story was true, then Anton himself had survived. But the question was not whether he had lived. It was whether he had chosen survival for himself, or for all of them. The whispers of survivors had kept the families alive with hope, but by 2007, official investigations had slowed to a crawl. The Vargas troupe was still listed as missing, presumed dead, with nothing but rumors and shadows to keep their story alive. And then, one scorching afternoon in the desert north of Douglas, Arizona, the earth gave up a secret it had been holding for nearly a decade. A road crew clearing a stretch of abandoned highway stumbled upon the corner of something metallic protruding from the soil. At first, they thought it was scrap, maybe the rusting skeleton of a water tank buried in a storm. But when the bulldozer pushed deeper, the unmistakable outline of a vehicle emerged. Its paint eaten away, its frame almost entirely concealed beneath hardened clay. When investigators arrived, they realized it wasn't just a car. It was one of the Vanished Circus's convoy trucks. The vehicle was unearthed carefully, inch by inch, until its full body rose from the desert like a coffin exhumed from the earth. Its faded red paint still bore faint stencil letters: Vargas Marvels. The tires were gone, stripped down to metal rims, and the windows had been shattered. The cab reeked of decay, but not of death, not exactly. Inside the glove compartment, officers found a damp, crumbling ticket stub for the Cienega Springs performance of 1998, their final known show. On the back seat lay a sequined glove, stiff with dust. The driver's side floorboard still held a shoe, a woman's size 6, the leather cracked but intact. And then came the discovery that chilled everyone on scene: the trunk. It took crowbars to wrench it open. The hinges screamed, snapping under years of corrosion. Inside, there were no bodies. Instead, investigators found what seemed like evidence of abandonment or something far worse. Stacks of costumes were folded neatly, pressed against one another like relics of a performance no one ever came to see. A clown's mask, its paint chipped and smeared. A ringmaster's jacket with gold buttons missing, its once bright fabric stained by time. And at the very bottom, pressed flat against the wood, was a notebook. The pages had rotted together, but forensic teams managed to separate fragments. On the legible sheets were scribbles in frantic handwriting, lists of names, performers, acrobats, musicians, each one crossed out with jagged lines, except for 3. Anton, Elena, Hugo. The car was not empty of human traces, either. Soil samples taken from the trunk revealed faint traces of human blood, too degraded for full DNA, but enough to prove what families had feared. The troop had been in that vehicle, and at least one of them had been injured inside it. Still, what gnawed at investigators wasn't just the evidence. It was the placement. The truck had been buried deliberately, the soil packed tightly over its body, the site chosen far from any main road. Whoever left it there hadn't wanted it found, which raised the question, why leave behind the truck at all? Why not burn it, dismantle it, erase it completely? Unless the burial itself was a message. For the families, the unearthed car became an icon. They traveled to the site, leaving flowers, candles, and photographs pressed into the earth. Sophia stood beside the rusted shell, her voice cracking as she whispered, "This proves they were taken. This proves they fought." But the notebook only deepened the torment. What did the names mean? Why had only 3 been left uncrossed? Did it mean those 3 survived? Or that they had been chosen for something else? Something worse? Law enforcement speculated quietly that Anton, Elena, and Hugo may have played a role in what happened, whether by force or by choice. That theory divided the families. Some refused to believe anyone they loved could have betrayed the troop. Others admitted the thought had haunted them for years. What if survival had come at a price? And then came a detail that almost slipped past investigators. A scrap of paper tucked into the notebook's back cover, its edges scorched as though burned before being hidden. On it were 3 words written in a child's hand. Still performing. Help. The handwriting didn't match Anton or Elena or Hugo. Forensic experts concluded it belonged to someone far younger, likely a child between the ages of 9 and 12. That discovery changed everything. It suggested that at least one of the Vargas children had been alive long after 1998. Alive and forced to write those words. The unearthed car reopened the case on a national level. News outlets splashed photographs of the rusted truck across headlines. Circus mystery resurfaces. One read, another, buried secrets of Vargas marvels. The nation that had forgotten the missing troop suddenly remembered them, and the whispers of survivors no longer seemed like ghost stories. But the most haunting revelation came from a forensics team. Soil packed beneath the truck matched the same clay found near Nogales, the very city where the smuggling tunnel had been discovered, which meant the truck had been moved, taken first underground, then reburied in another desert, as though shuffled like a playing card in a game no one could win. For investigators, the unearthed car was the first solid thread connecting the tunnel, the survivors' whispers, and the convoy's disappearance. But pulling that thread only unraveled darker possibilities. Had Anton led the troop willingly into the tunnels? Had someone else buried their traces while keeping the performers alive? And if some had survived, why leave behind desperate pleas for help? The car raised questions it couldn't answer, questions that sank their hooks deeper into the families' minds. One thing, however, was undeniable. The Vargas troop had not been erased. They had been moved, hidden, traded like pieces in a larger game. And if the unearthed car was proof of that, then the nightmare had never ended. It had only changed its stage. Anton Volkov was not just a ringmaster. To many who had seen him under the red glow of the big top lights, he was a circus itself. Magnetic, commanding, a figure who could silence a crowd with a single raised hand. He spoke in a voice rich with promise, every word dipped in velvet and thunder. Children adored him, adults distrusted him, and performers depended on him like a captain at sea. But when the circus vanished in 1998, his name was the one whispered first. Because if anyone could lead an entire troop off the face of the earth, surely it was a man in the crimson coat. For years, Anton lived in stories passed between law enforcement and grieving families. To the mothers who lit candles in their kitchens every night, he was a demon who had stolen their children. To detectives, he was a question mark that taunted every report. What was his role in all this? To the scattered carnival workers from other troupes who remembered him, he was something else entirely, an escape artist in his own right. Rumors claimed he had ties to smugglers, that he used the circus as a front to move contraband across state lines. Others insisted he had been seen in border towns, speaking to men with no reason to mingle with circus folk. But no paper trail proved it, no arrest record followed him. Anton Balkov lived like a ghost, slipping between cities, leaving behind only posters, rumors, and an aura of unease. When the smuggling tunnel was discovered years later, half collapsed under a warehouse in Nogales, Arizona, fragments of the circus were found inside. Cages, sequined costumes, rusted poles. But the most chilling relic was a notebook, its cover cracked, the ink faded. On the first page was Anton's handwriting. Theatrical and precise, the show must go on. What did it mean? Was it a diary? A ledger? Or was it a taunt? Scrawled as a message for whoever would one day find it? Investigators pored over its contents. Lists of names, sketches of stage designs, strange notes that read more like coded instructions than circus planning. Some pages had only one word written again and again in hurried, frenzied strokes. Down. The handwriting was confirmed to be Anton's, but his body was never found. Those who had performed with him painted a portrait that was anything but simple. He could be cruel, mocking performers when the crowds cheered louder for them than for him. He could be generous, handing out envelopes of cash when the circus did well, insisting, family first. He was known to disappear for days, returning with foreign cigarettes, gold watches, and stories no one believed. He had secrets, one trapeze artist whispered years later. Secrets stacked on secrets. And he made us feel safe as long as we didn't ask. But what kind of safety was it? Did Anton orchestrate the circus's disappearance, luring his troupe into the desert night and into tunnels carved for smugglers? Or did he lead them to something darker, only to be swallowed by it himself? In the weeks after the tunnel discovery, a theory began to spread. What if Anton had promised his troupe protection, a way to keep the struggling circus alive by working with men far more dangerous than ticket scalpers and carnival rivals? What if the circus, already collapsing under debt and fading crowds, was turned into cargo, human lives reduced to bargaining chips? The thought was unbearable, yet it explained too much. Anton's notebook became an obsession for investigators. One page, in particular, stood out. A rough map was drawn, lines weaving into the desert, arrows pointing south. At the bottom of the page was a single phrase. The curtain falls where the sun dies. Poetic, yes, but also a clue? Some believed it pointed to a burial site. Others thought it was Anton's final flourish, a cryptic performance piece scribbled in madness. Still others insisted it was meant for someone who was supposed to understand its meaning. But the most unsettling discovery came not from a notebook, but from testimony. A boy, once a roustabout for circus, now a grown man, stepped forward after years of silence. He remembered Anton gathering the performers in the weeks before the disappearance, speaking of a final journey and a stage no one could take away. He recalled the way Anton smiled when people asked what he meant, a smile too wide, too certain. It made people wonder, had Anton known exactly what was coming? And if he did, why did the others follow? Perhaps it was charisma. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the same blind loyalty that had always kept circus folk together, even when the world mocked them as outsiders. They trusted their ringmaster. They trusted Anton. And maybe that trust was the very thing that sealed their fate. The strangest part of all was what surfaced years later, far from Arizona. In a pawn shop in Sonora, Mexico, a red coat was found. Torn, sun-bleached, but unmistakably Anton's. The pawnbroker claimed it had been sold by a man with a Russian accent, tall and gaunt, who vanished as quickly as he came. Authorities could never confirm the story, but it left a question that refused to die. If Anton Balkov was alive after the circus vanished, then where had he been all those years? And if he wasn't alive, if that coat was a relic passed through bloody hands, then who had kept it and why? The families wanted closure. Investigators wanted evidence. But what they got was another shadow, another echo of a man who seemed to bend reality the way others bent steel. Anton Volkov's presence lingered long after his circus disappeared, in the wreckage of the tunnel, in the ink of his notebook, in the rumors passed from border town to border town, always elusive, always taunting. The ringmaster was gone, but his shadow remained. And in that shadow was the most dangerous question of all. Had Anton been the puppet master of a tragedy, or merely one of its first victims? The answer, many feared, lay buried somewhere in the desert. But the desert, like Anton, knew how to keep its secrets. 6 years after the circus disappeared, when the tunnel was uncovered beneath a warehouse in Nogales, investigators thought they were close to closure. But the truth didn't move in straight lines. It twisted, coiled, and hid itself like smoke. What remained of the circus was fragments, like broken pieces of a mirror that refused to show a whole reflection. Cages eaten through with rust. Sequins dulled by desert damp. A torn banner with only half its name visible. Missed, the rest shredded away. Every discovery raised questions, and every question led to silence. Yet the silence was not empty. For families, it was filled with echoes, laughter under the big top, the crack of the whip, the smell of sawdust. For investigators, it was the weight of unfinished work, unsolved crimes, and trails that died in sand. And for those who lived under Anton Volkov's spell, it was a reminder that the ringmaster's voice had not just commanded a circus. It had commanded them. Theories piled up over the years like stacked chairs in an abandoned tent. Some believed the troupe had been trafficked across the border, sold into lives darker than any sideshow. Others clung to the idea that Anton had promised them sanctuary, only for them to vanish into a desert grave. And still others whispered that the circus lived on in pieces, scattered across backcountry fairs and seedy carnivals, its performers too afraid to tell the truth of what happened. But when all the speculation was stripped away, one fact remained. Not a single body was ever found. No graves, no bones, nothing to mark the final resting place of men, women, and children who had once drawn gasps of joy from the crowd. It was as if they walked off the face of the earth, hand in hand, swallowed whole by a stage that no longer existed. The discovery of Anton's coat in a Mexican pawn shop only deepened the wound. If it truly was his, had he survived? Had he betrayed them? Or had someone else carried it as a trophy, wearing the ringmaster's shadow like a second skin? Each theory was worse than the last. Each answer only widened the hole. And so the circus became a legend, a cautionary tale told in desert towns, a ghost story whispered by truckers passing long, lonely stretches of highway. Some swore they heard music on the wind, calliope notes bending and fading in the night. Others claimed to see flickers of light, as if torches were still being raised in the distance, beyond the reach of roads. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps grief, or perhaps the circus never stopped performing, trapped in some purgatory between the living and the dead. The final curtain never truly fell. It still hangs, waiting, daring someone pull it back. And if one day it does, if the last piece of the puzzle is dragged out of the desert, if the voices of the vanished are ever heard again, it may not bring peace. It may only reveal a truth darker than anyone ever imagined, because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries aren't solved. They linger, they haunt, they wait. And this one, the story of a circus that vanished in 1998, will remain a shadow on the edge of the American desert until the day someone dares to face what lies behind that final curtain. If you've been pulled into this mystery as deeply as we have, make sure you subscribe to Criminal Mind Tales, because the stories only get darker and the questions only get harder to answer. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.